The unexplained mystery of the Mary Celeste. The Mary Celeste was a merchant brigantine that was launched under British registration in 1861 as Amazon. 7 years later, she was transferred to American ownership and was rechristened as the Mary Celeste. The British brig, Dei Gratia, was about 400 miles east of the Azores on December 5, 1872, when suddenly crew members spotted a ship adrift in the seas. Now, the sea at this time was quite rough. Captain David Morehouse was taken aback to discover that the unguided vessel was the Mary Celeste, which had in fact left New York City 8 days before him, and it should have arrived in Genoa, Italy. He decided to change course to see if, he should offer help. Morehouse sent a boarding party to the ship. Below deck, the ship's charts had been kind of moved about, sort of tossed about, and the crewmen's belongings were still in their quarters. The ship's only lifeboat was missing, and one of its 2 pumps had been disassembled. 3.5 feet of water was sloshing around in the bottom of the ship, and though the cargo of 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol was largely intact, there was a 6-month supply of food and water, yet there was nobody on board to consume it. So one of the most durable mysteries in nautical history began. What happened to the 10 people who had sailed aboard the Mary Celeste? Through the decades, a lack of hard facts has only spurred speculation as to what might have taken place. Theories have ranged from attacks from pirates, sea monsters, to killer waterspouts, or even, alien abductions. The only possible clues that could explain the crew's whereabouts were a disassembled pump in the hold and a missing lifeboat. So the Mary Celeste had sailed forth, helmed by Captain Benjamin Briggs and his crew of 7 men. They were actually hand-picked sailors. Accompanying the sailors were Briggs' wife and daughter and infant daughter. According to the Smithsonian Magazine, the ship and her crew spent 2 weeks at sea fighting against raging storms and treacherous seas before actually reaching the Azores. Captain Briggs chronicled the rough journey in his journal, but curiously, his log ended abruptly on November 25, 1872 at 5 o'clock in the morning. And the other strange thing was the night prior, his log recalled the ship and her crew had continued to face rough seas and winds of more than 35 knots. But by the morning, they had come out the other side unscathed, with the Azores Islands in sight. So it had all seemed well. It made no sense that Briggs, who was actually a well-experienced seaman, would just abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship. In fact, Daily Nautica reports Morehouse had dined with Briggs in New York just before each of the men and their respective crews set sail and considered the man to be a friend. So Morehouse and his crew then towed the merchant ship with them to Gibraltar, where the authorities conducted an investigation that ultimately yielded no conclusive results. At this point, several theories began to surface. The first to hypothesize on these theories was English Inspector Frederick Flood was the first to hypothesize as to the disappearance of the crew. And with the knowledge that Morehouse and Briggs were friends, the inspector suspected that the 2 captains may have concocted a scheme to defraud the insurance company and split the profit earned from the Mary Celeste's eventual sale. Per the laws of the sea, the abandoned ship did now belong to Morehouse after all. The inspector then theorized that Briggs had killed his crew and hidden himself away in the cargo hold of the Dei Gratia. Flood's theory, however, was full of holes. Briggs had in fact held property shares in the ship. He would have gained nothing in this scheme. So the theory also failed to account for Briggs' wife and daughter. The crew of the De Gratia eventually did receive payment. It was, however, only 1/6 of the total $46,000 value of the Mary Celeste. So apparently the authorities weren't totally convinced of their innocence. Other theories have also suggested that the crew got drunk off the ship's alcohol cargo and then mutinied. But there were no signs of violence, there was just absolutely nothing. Others said the ship must have been raided by pirates. Yet there's no valuables were missing, nothing had been stolen. So the mystery may have been forgotten by now, had not the British author Arthur Conan Doyle written the 1884 short story J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement, a fictitious account of an ex-slave who captures the ship. The story then reignited interest in the ship, though as a theory the story was of course entirely baseless. Stories of sea monsters also became associated with the missing crew, as did explanations of the waterspouts and then much later the extraterrestrial abduction. Yet for all these theories, none of the evidence ever matched. Perhaps the most plausible theory was that vapors from the alcohol had blown the hatch cover off. Then, fearing fire, the crew abandoned ship. However, the hatch cover was securely fastened, once again leaving no plausible explanation. Over a century later, in 2002, documentarian Anne McGregor sought to investigate the story of the now infamous ghost ship. There are obvious limitations for historical cases, she said, but using the latest technology, you can come to a different conclusion. McGregor enlisted the help of a physical oceanographer at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts named Phil Richardson. And together they did reconstruct the drift of the ghost ship and deduced that Briggs' chronometer had been faulty. The Mary Celeste was hopelessly off course. It was 120 miles west of where it should have been. The captain thus expected to spot land 3 days earlier than he did. McGregor also analyzed Flood's notes from the time to determine that all had indeed been going as planned with the Mary Celeste's course, until about 5 days before Briggs' final log. It is significant that Briggs' logs and Flood's notes did show that the ship had changed course the day before it reached the Azores. Briggs was now sailing directly north towards Santa Maria Island. It's possible the crew was seeking haven from the foul weather. However, even all this would not explain why the captain would abandon the ship. McGregor also discovered that the ship had been recently refitted. Coal dust and debris from the refitting had likely clogged the ship's pumps, meaning any water that may have made it into the ship's lower decks didn't have a way back out and could be blocking things. It's possible that Briggs decided that with the ship off course, the crew's best bet was to cut their losses and simply try to save themselves by abandoning ship and heading for the nearest piece of land. In this case, it would have been the Santa Maria Island. However, McGregor's theory is by no means universally accepted or definitively provable, but it at least lines up with the evidence, the disassembled pump, for example, in a way that most of the other theories do not. So it's possible that 130 years after the crew's strange disappearance, that the mystery of the Mary Celeste may finally have an answer. However, before this mystery happened, the Mary Celeste had in fact had a pretty shadowy past. It was originally christened the Amazon. It was given a new name after a series of mishaps, including the sudden illness and death of its first captain, and a collision with another ship in the English Channel. An investigation into whether to grant payment by its insurers to the De Gratis crew for salvaging the ghost ship found no evidence of foul play. Mary Celeste would sail under different owners for 12 years before its last captain deliberately decided to run it aground in Haiti as part of an attempt insurance fraud. In 2001, Clive Cussler, a best-selling novelist and adventurer, claimed to have found the wreck of Mary Celeste. But later analysis of the timbers retrieved from the ship he found showed the wood was still living at least a decade after Mary Celeste sank. So the question remains, why would an experienced captain such as Briggs or his sailors abandon a perfectly sound ship? And why were they never seen again? And no remains, clothes, or anything were found, or even the lifeboat. Nothing was ever found. So the mystery of the Mary Celeste endures, and nobody has been able to prove what exactly happened to the crew on board that fateful day. The Ellen Austen and the Mysterious Ship. One of the strangest and most interesting oceanic tales is that of the strange encounter between the Ellen Austen, which was an 1854 three-mast schooner, and a mysterious ship found abandoned and adrift near the Bermuda Triangle. The Ellen Austen's captain had sent two separate crews, apparently, to bring the mysterious vessel to New York as a salvage prize. Both crews mysteriously disappeared, and the derelict ship was lost forever, never to be seen again. So where did that mysterious ship come from? And why did it disappear, along with the missing crew? What is the truth, and what is fiction? The Ellen Austen was built in Damariscotta, Maine. It was built of white oak, and when the ship was completed for the Tucker family of Wiscasset, Maine, it weighed 1,812 tons, and it measured 210 feet long. In early 1855, the Ellen Austen was scheduled to sail from Damariscotta, Maine to Savannah, Georgia. During that trip, the crew also encountered the Florence, which was a ship that was dismasted in a severe gale and was in serious trouble. The captain of the Florence was named Captain Wood, and both he and his crew were rescued by the Ellen Austen and brought to port at Savannah in April of 1855. The next month, the Ellen Austen was set to depart Savannah and was bound for Liverpool, and it was carrying a very large cotton cargo. It was the largest cargo of cotton ever cleared at that port, apparently. In 1856, the Ellen Austen was serving as a packet ship for the Patriotic Line under Captain William H. Garrick in 1856. While working for the Patriotic Line, the schooner ran between Liverpool and New York City. During that time, the ship encountered various incidents, and in July of 1856, the Ellen Austen reported an estimated loss of $60,000 worth of cargo, which today would be more than $1.7 million. In September of 1856, the London Times published an announcement that the Ellen Austen had sailed from Liverpool for New York. In 1857, the New York Tribune also reported an incident of brutality at sea, whilst reporting certain details of violence and abuse, including torture, which were employed by Captain Garrick and his crew during the ship's 1856 journey. The report mentioned that Captain Garrick knocked Thomas Campbell down with a heavy wire rope and then beat him over the back and shoulders, lacerating his body and also inflicting severe wounds upon his head. Not satisfied with his own brutality, the captain then set on two large, ferocious dogs who tore and mutilated his legs. Apparently, the papers declared measures would be taken for the arrest of Captain William H. Garrick, his first mate and boatswain. But unfortunately, those measures were never actually carried out, and the New York Tribune made an announcement in August of 1857 that indicated that Garrick was still the captain of the Ellen Austin, and charges apparently had not stuck against him. By 1857, a case of smallpox actually broke out on the Ellen Austin, and the vessel departed Liverpool with 553 emigrants. But by the time they arrived in New York, the ship had to be sent directly to quarantine. Apparently, 12 of those passengers had become infected with the disease. 5 more cases would later be reported after the ship had docked. It seems that the Ellen Austin ship was fraught with misfortune, sickness, violence, and just ill health. And, for example, in November of 1859, the Ellen Austin arrived in New York from Liverpool. The ship next arrived in New York in July of 1860. During this same midsummer journey to New York, officers of the Ellen Austin were also accused of tying the arms and knees of a passenger together and passing a stick between them before rolling him along the deck like a bale of goods. By this time, the Ellen Austin had become so famous for its misfortunes that the Richmond Dispatch even added, "This ship, it is said, seldom arrives in port without similar charges being made by passengers and crew of violent usage on the part of the officers." The New York Times then went on to repeat the Richmond Dispatch's sentiments. "The officers of the Ellen Austin have a very unenviable notoriety for alleged cruelty to their men, and that the vessel has scarcely ever entered port without complaints being made in our police courts against them for cruel and inhuman treatment." It seems that under the command of Captain William Garrick, there were a lot of reports of violence and cruelty. And on March 10th of 1864, the ship crashed into the vessel Troubadour, tearing its jibsand, carrying away its bowsprit. In September 18th, 1870, the Ellen Austin passed Cape Horn and encountered a heavy gale which caused damage to the bulwarks, post-quarter boat, and it broke adrift spars which lashed the deck and caused the vessel to leak. It was repaired and resumed her shipping lane. She cleared San Francisco ports in October of 1872 and once again was bound for New York. A few days after her departure, the Ellen Austin again collided with another ship. She hit the Anne Humphreys, which lost its foremast, main topmast, sails, and the whole of the gear attached, and also sustained considerable damage to Port Bow. During its final journey as a packet ship, the Ellen Austin met with the unknown and unnamed mysterious ship in the Bermuda Triangle. The Swallowtail Line schooner departed from London on December 5, 1880, and it was bound for New York. A few weeks later, on its journey, the Ellen Austin came across the unidentified schooner that was drifting just north of the Sargasso Sea. It was just sailing an erratic path, apparently. Captain Baker of the Ellen Austin then commanded his crew to follow and to observe this derelict for 2 days, just to make sure that this was not a trap. After about 2 days of not noticing any activity and no movement on board the mysterious vessel, The captain was, by that time, convinced that it was safe to go ahead and get closer to it. The Ellen Austin moved within hailing distance. When the ship failed to respond, the captain then went ahead and sent 4 of his men to go on board the abandoned ship and to see, what was going on, if there was actually anybody there, any bodies, or, if there were any cargo or anything on board. Since there was no response to the hails, the men decided to board the ship with weapons drawn just in case. The captain was first, and as he boarded, he hailed the missing crew again. There was no response. They inspected the vessel, and it appeared to be in good shape, and it was really well maintained, and its sails were furled and tattered from the exposure, but the vessel's rigging was actually intact. There were no signs of the crew, but there were no signs of violence either. The only things missing were the ship's nameplates, which for some reason had been removed from the bow, and the ship's log. 2 of the crew members reported that the ship actually contained a well-packed shipment of mahogany. Captain Baker even speculated that the schooner had likely been sailing from Honduras, possibly bound for England or maybe the Mediterranean port. Perhaps something had convinced the crew to evacuate for whatever reason. The circumstances were just mysterious and strange, but the captain was intrigued by the opportunity to salvage this otherwise fine ship. So the captain decided to send some of his crew, his best men, to sail the ship to New York. So they went aboard and they followed the Ellen Austin. Within a few hours, Captain Baker's prize crew had the vessel sorted and they were on their way. So things were pretty calm for the next 2 days. The waters were just, quite mild, and there were no signs of any storms or anything. So within earshot of each other, the ships just kind of sailed along quite peacefully. However, on day 3, the schooners were then separated by a fierce Atlantic storm that just suddenly came out of nowhere. It was a side effect of a hurricane that was tearing through Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia at that time. For days, the pounding on the ships was relentless, and eventually the ships separated and contact was lost. After another 2 days, the skies began to clear and the sea became calm again. Visibility extended for miles, and the waters were just strangely quiet and just very flat and smooth as glass. The crew on the Ellen Austin looked out into the horizon, but they could see nothing of the other ship. There was no sign of it. The vessel and the captain's prize crew had completely disappeared. So the 2 ships were separated for quite a long time, and until eventually the mysterious ship once again came into view of the Ellen Austin. And Captain Baker was once again looking out through his spyglass, and he could see the sails of the derelict. For some reason, it did not seem to be following course, and once again, it seemed to be drifting aimlessly, just like the first time they saw it. Baker then ordered his ship to change course so that they could once again try to intercept and, take the ship as a salvage opportunity, and they were, of course, expecting to find the crew members on board once they got close to it. But as they got closer, those on board the Ellen Austin had this bad feeling like there was something wrong. The abandoned vessel was just sailing about erratically as if it had no crew to control it. It took a few hours for the Ellen Austin to catch up to her. When the Ellen Austin eventually closed in on it, the captain and his men began to hail the ship, but received no response. It was as if there was no life on board. So Captain Baker once again assembled an inspection team, and they rowed out to the ship. And again, the men boarded with guns drawn, just like the first time, only this time they were much more wary. They found absolutely no sign of the prize crew. No one was on board. Once again, the cargo hold was still full, and most everything else was in order, except there was no prize crew, and it was as if nobody had even been on the ship. There was no food missing, the beds had not been slept in, and the new logbook that had been left by Captain Baker upon the vessel's first discovery had completely disappeared. They looked everywhere and they couldn't find it. Although very much spooked, but the captain was still keen to salvage the ship and make some money from it, because the ship was in good working order by the looks of things. The crew, however, felt that the ship was cursed, and after their crewmates missing like that, it was obviously something that was very spooky and very frightening for them. So once again, the captain decided to send a team of prize crew to board the mysterious unnamed vessel and try to sail it back with the Ellen Austin to have it salvaged and to make a profit. So the crew members, of course, weren't happy to do this, but they followed orders, and it took a few hours for the captain to convince them to board the ship, and because many of them were quite superstitious, and the crew did fear that there was something evil at play. The captain tried to reassure the men by letting them carry firearms and also of keeping a distance of no more than 10 ship lengths between the two ships. So the second crew went ahead and decided to take on the assignment. As the men got ready, the derelict for sailing back to New York, the weather again started to change. This time, there was this dense fog that began to settle across the water, and it was like this cloud of mist just suddenly came over, and the visibility of the two ships, between the two ships, was just a few feet. So again, the Ellen Austin's lookout lost sight of the second ship. The sea was actually quite calm, but because of the fog, the ship had just disappeared. Eventually, the lack of visibility just brought the Ellen Austin to a standstill. For hours, the men tried to look out through the fog, looking through the waters and trying to find traces of the other ship behind them. But when the fog finally lifted, the lookout, who was the first to shout out, "She's gone!" And by this time, Captain Baker listened to his crew, and they just left. They no longer searched for the ship, they just left. So the legend says that the Ellen Austin never again saw the derelict or its second prize crew. Captain Baker's schooner did continue on to New York, and it arrived somewhat late in February of 1881. This seemed to mark the retirement of the Ellen Austin, as it never again resumed its packet ship service. Later on in that year, it was sold to a German company, and they renamed it the Meta. She would meet her fate just 2 years later, however, and in 1883, she was apparently wrecked along the American coast, and she was under the command of Captain A.J. Griffin at that time. So the mystery of the derelict, unnamed ship and the two prize crews was never solved, and those men were never seen again.